How the Grinch Stole Whoville. Each camper in Whoville liked Whoville a lot, but the Grinch who lived north of the river did not.
The Grinch hated Whoville, the whole occupation, just like all the Grinches across the whole nation.
It could be his head wasn't screwed on just right. It could be perhaps that his shoes were too tight.
But I think the most likely reason of all may have been that his heart was 2 sizes too small.
Whatever the reason, his heart or his shoes, he looked at the camp with contempt for the Whos. From his window behind his new wrought iron fence, as the Whos huddled up in their blankets and tents.
For he knew every Who camper under the sky was helping each other keep safe, warm, and dry. And now all the neighbors and businesses too are showing compassion. Oh, what shall I do?
He growled with his Grinch fingers scratching his head. I must find some way to stop Whoville, he said.
For he knew as a spark can turn into a blaze, an idea can blossom in so many ways. And then, oh, he knew, just as sure as dry socks, the cat would be let out of Pandora's box.
For once all the poor had their basic needs met, the next thing you know, they would have their sights set on the systems of greed and the laws of the lands that allowed so much wealth held in far fewer hands.
They find themselves able to find themselves time to stand out on the streets with their well-written signs, calling out all the criminals, crooks on their crimes.
They'd gather their petitions, they'd set up blockades, they'd publicly give all their congressmen grades.
They send in their letters to register guard, they cover all bases and play every card, even protest in front of their Grinch's front yard.
They'd email the Senate, the president too, and they'd let them all know what we already knew.
That democracy as we once knew it was dead.
It was dead, dead, dead.
And the things for which so many soldiers had bled had been tossed to the garbage bin, thrown out the door.
By the big money war machine corporate whore that was making such profit as never before on the blood of the youth and the backs of the poor.
And then like the school of fish working together, they find themselves suddenly able to weather
and withstand attacks from the moneyed elite who were so far removed from a life on the street.
And they'd find themselves able to change up the laws that before had once favored those corporate claws.
And before you could say, Ma and Pa, look at me, the people would suddenly find themselves free, 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 free.
Now the thought of this made his poor Grinch heart beat faster, considering all the potential disaster. To what was considered before out of reach, and held sacred by every star-bellied sneetch.
I was born to my station. It's what I deserve. And these upstart Whovillians have got quite the nerve
to be challenging that which both you and I know, the true and unending, the old status quo.
And the more the Grinch thought of the change that could bring, the more the Grinch thought, I must stop this whole thing.
I must nip this whole Whoville thing in the bud now. I must stop this Whoville from spreading. But how?
Then he got an idea, an awful idea. The Grinch got a wonderful, awful idea.
I'll call up my army of internet trolls who never come out of their internet holes where they live on black coffee and Wonder Bread rolls.
I'll give them my talking heads point of the day.
And they'll sit at their keyboards all typing away as they parrot the things. And I want them to say,
I'll have them promote the most terrible lies that were thought of by bigots with prejudiced eyes.
And the next thing you know, the whole town will despise all these campers who live in the cold and the rain by the light of the moon and the sound of the train.
And they'll view them with fear, as they say with disdain.
They're hairy, they're scary, they're dirty, they're smelly. They can't afford even 1 star on their belly.
And thus by the words of my internet minions, I'll influence the public at large's opinions. And then when they pass in their gas-guzzling cruisers,
they'll stick out their fingers and say, get a job, losers!
So the Grinch rounded up all the trolls he could find, like Duck Lover, Pig Iron, and Ichabod Slime.
And Nervous with Wrenches and Out on a Ledge.
And a clever conniver named Close to the Edge.
There was Running with Scissors and Playing with Glue.
And good old Surrounded by Cats 22.
They descended en masse with their comments and flames, writing stupid-ass crap with anonymous names.
That instead of political 1% games, the homeless would then be who everyone blames.
The Grinch was impressed because his plan was so sick.
It was sick, 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 sick.
And he chuckled and clucked, what a great Grinchy trick.
And this underhand business won't cost me a lick.
Then he pulled out his secret red Grinchamophone.
Directly connected, but largely unknown, to every last local authority's home.
He gave them the heads up, the high sign, the clue, on the low-low, just what he intended to do.
I want you to secretly add to the laws a new small print subsection, technical clause.
That addresses insurance and safety and health.
So then when we need it, it's there on the shelf.
To give us a fallback and find legalese to basically do just whatever we please.
And then when it's time to go tear down the shacks, I'll make sure that the public at large has your backs.
Just stick to the plan and the plan will not fail. Why, they might even vote for a new, bigger jail.
They say that they want shelter. He snickered and cackled. We'll give them a place they can stay where they're shackled.
They'll finally be out of the public's eye, except when we let them out under the sky.
To clean up the litter from the cars driving by. And one little last thing to keep in your mind is how this affair affects our bottom line.
We'll make out like bandits with perfect precision, considering we own all the stocks in the prison.
He slammed down his red Grinchy phone on its hook and retired to his red Grinchy velvety nook.
He was sure that he had all his ducks in a row, and from there he'd just kick back and enjoy the show.
But the one thing he hadn't expected was snow.
The snow, the cold freezing snow. The beautiful, cold falling, fluffy white snow, with temperatures falling to 7 below.
And most of the townspeople yearning to know of the fate of those out there with no place to go.
They gathered up blankets and mittens and boots and snow hats and sub-zero cold weather suits.
And anything else for survival in winter. And took them to Egan, the town's warming center.
Named after a veteran unhoused who died. And with utmost concern, the community cried,
"Tonight could prove fatal to someone outside." And some of them even went searching around in various places throughout the whole town.
In the alleys and parks with the hard frozen ground, to check on whoever was still to be found, and make sure that all the folks out there would know the emergency places for people to go.
Now the internet trolls found themselves greatly humbled. They brewed and they stewed and they mumbled and grumbled.
With people out helping those needing it most, it's no one but us reading each other's posts.
And the Grinch for his part was just sitting there steaming,
confused by the truth of the season's true meaning. And just when he thought he could stand it no more, there came a soft knocking upon his front door.
And there in the face of his furious rage was a girl half his size and of middle school age.
It was Sally McPhee from the camp by the river, and though the chill wind made her shudder and shiver, she held in her hands an old beat-up guitar, and she said to the Grinch, "I have walked long and far,
just to come to your doorstep and sing you a song. I hope you will listen. It's not very long."
And what happened then? Well, in Whoville they say that the Grinch's small heart grew 3 sizes that day.
And the minute his heart didn't feel quite so tight, he considered her there in the moon's evening light.
He stood at his door for a long moment staring, and suddenly found himself actually caring. He said in a voice that was still rather gruff, "I'll give you a minute," she said, "that's enough."
And she started in playing her guitar and singing about all the things in her heart that were ringing. She sang of compassion to all those in need, but she also implored him to note and take heed
of the fact that by helping those living in tents, it wasn't just kind, it made good dollar sense.
Fiscally, he was the plain bottom line. A penny spent now is going to save us a dime.
Yes, helping folks now will save taxpayers a lot,
compared to just throwing them in prison to rot.
For the data is simple, there's no way around it. You say you want answers? Well, look here, we found it. Exhibit A, this from the Rand Corporation. Each dollar we spend on small child education will pay up to $17 tomorrow. Now that's an investment for which I could borrow.
And here's an idea we all should be trying. Just Google the prison they closed at Fort Lyon, where someone got smart and collected the bets, and they set up a new super shelter for vets.
With treatment and counseling and job training too.
Now what do you think something like this could do?
By helping the homeless, the money they spent cut the cost in the long run by 70%.
And back here at home in the camps we're living, it's hard to deny that there's something we're giving.
We might not enjoy an official endorsement, but many would say we assist law enforcement. Perhaps in some small but significant ways. The things that we deal with day after day are often the things that would otherwise be taking up precious time of our local PD.
Imagine how much more the city would spin if the camps were dispersed, scattered out to the wind. And where would we go if we're kicked out of there? Do we really want more of us at Kesey Square?
By letting Whovilleans gather together, you won't just save lives in this bitter cold weather.
Will give us a sense of community too, a pride that is built watching who helping who.
Sally looked at her watch. She had 1 second left. Then she looked in his eyes and she took a deep breath. It's not just some woo-woo, far-out hippie feeling. Prosperity comes when the hurting are healing.
She finished her song and they stood there together in silence and feeling the cold winter weather. The Grinch thought at length about what she had sung, and he bowed in respect and he left his head hung.
Then he raised it and said with a light in his eyes, "Why, my girl, this is one unexpected surprise.
I thought I would always be set in my ways, but hear this. I declare till the end of my days
that I'll dedicate all of my life to improving the fate of us all with my shaking and moving."
And don't get me wrong, I still fully intend to make sure these Whovilles all come to an end. But unlike back when my intentions were mean,
and my poor heart was filled with more bile than my spleen, I'll work toward this goal for a far better reason.
That goes beyond merely some holiday season. Instead of derision, we'll show you compassion, and kindness will come back in vogue and in fashion.
Let's take in the poor, and let's house them and feed them, and then all the camps will be gone. We won't need them.
With that and a sudden departure, he raced to his back bedroom closet in which he had placed
his enormous electric loud Grinchmas shouter, and hooked up a feed to his internet router, and pointed the horn out the door toward the heavens, and turned up the dials to all the 11s.
He held the receiver and smiled at Sally and spoke in the roar to the whole river valley. The message is clear. All my sisters and brothers.
True happiness comes out of helping out others.
And everyone heard it on every street corner, and everyone's heart grew a little bit warmer.
And from that there moment throughout all the land, everybody was lending each neighbor a hand.
The people connected the obvious dots. They constructed new shelters on old empty lots. They funded the schools and they paid for the nurses, and all the fine books the library disperses. Emergency services, mental health centers, and snowplows to make the roads safe in the winters.
Yes, there was a small whimpering protest of trolls. Now in far fewer numbers, in far fewer holes, with their coffee-stained keyboards and Wonder Bread rolls. They tried to promote the austerity lie that would give the rich even more slices of pie.
You can't wave a hand and make money appear, they said in a last-ditch attempt to sow fear. They quoted Ayn Rand and they read Adam Smith. Now thankfully no one was buying that myth, and no one's quite sure why they'd toe such a line.
Although Stockholm Syndrome comes often to mind.
And the people rejected that 1% ruse and the 1% papers and the 1% news and the 1% right-wing talk radio shows owned by 0.1% CEOs.
The people elected new leaders who cared. They stood up and honestly, loudly declared, "The money we needed, it's always been there. We'll rewrite the tax code and make it more fair."
And the war machine budget was all redirected to programs that really made people protected, like healthcare for all and top-notch education and fixing the bridges and roads of the nation.
No longer would young people go to fight war to boost up the wealth of the company store.
No longer would Walmart's poor slave labor elves go hungry with no food to eat on their shelves.
And no longer would people be forced on the street, always having to hide just to get a night's sleep.
The Grinch put his arm around Sally McPhee as he took her inside for hot cocoa and tea.
And she thought to herself as they walked down the hall of the folks who said, "Girl, it's not worth it at all."
You'll never convince him. It's too hard to change him. His thoughts are too dark. You can't rearrange them. But Sally had stayed with it, true from the start, and had always believed what she'd held in her heart. She looked up and smiled and told him, "I knew it. The road won't be easy, but yes,
we can do it!"